Lots of people have asked me how to get started with illustrative lettering. I specify illustrative because I like to differentiate what I do from the very serious and technical art form that is lettering. What I do is more about illustrating with words and incorporating words into my illustrations and giving my letters a lot of character. That said, I do have a background in graphic design, and as a result, I spent a lot of time studying and working with typography. Although it may not immediately seem like there's a strong connection between traditional typography and illustrative lettering, a basic understanding of typographic and general design principles can go a long way towards improving your lettering. If you don't have a design background or you want to learn more, learning more is always a good thing. There's some great books that can really help you out. The first one I'd recommend is this one by Ellen Lupton, who's basically a rock star, called Thinking with Type. This has a lot of really good, solid information, but it's not too overwhelming and it's not super academic and boring. I think it's put together in a really approachable way. Another really great book, which I don't have in front of me because I don't know where I put it, is called Lettering and Type, Creating Letters and Designing Typefaces. I think Ellen Lupton is involved in that book as well. I think she does the foreword or something like that. And then if you want to get super nerdy, you need one of these. The Elements of Typographic Style. As you can see, mine is pretty worn. Spent some time with this book. This is a serious business book. This is not for the person who just wants to experiment. This is for a full-on design nerd, in a good way. I'll put links to the 3 of these books in the description. These will be Amazon affiliate links, so if you purchase with one of these links, I get a commission on that. Okay, with that design stuff out of the way, in this video, we're not going to get into that stuff. I'm not going to overwhelm you with typographic terms and technology. I'm not going to start dropping kerning knowledge. We're not going to talk about letter spacing. I'm going to show you some simple ways to just get started with lettering and make some cool things without a ton of design knowledge or a ton of experience drawing letters. It's just a simple way to make some cool looking handmade type to add to your illustrations, or I don't know, you can do anything. Maybe you need to make a sweet logo for your band. These tips will get you going in the right direction. So let's meet back here at my iPod and, did I say iPod? You guys ever heard of an iPod? I had a lot of iPods in my day. Okay, no iPods. We're gonna, 1 second, boom. All right, I'm gonna snap and we're gonna be looking at my iPad. Ready? Okay, so this may seem counterintuitive because we're trying to do hand lettering, but starting with a font can be a really great way to just start experimenting with lettering without any of the pressure of trying to come up with your own lettering styles. So what we're gonna do is set our type in whatever you want it to say, choose a font. I recommend choosing something simple. I'm using Futura Bold here. So what I'm gonna do is turn down the opacity of my layer. And then I'm gonna make a new layer. And I'm just gonna trace over these letters. So stylistically, this is going to give us that handmade quality. And then at the same time, it's some sneaky practice because you are getting more comfortable drawing letter forms through drawing existing letter forms. And if you choose good typefaces, you will get even more out of it because they will be well drawn to begin with. But you'll start to be able to focus on the shapes of the curves and the opening spaces, the width of the letters. If you choose a typeface that has more diversity in terms of weight changes, where there's like thick and thin areas, you'll start to notice where the places are that are wider and skinnier, and then you'll start to realize that there's a sort of a system where it happens in all different letter forms. A pro tip, that thickness and thinness is almost always based on sort of like traditional calligraphy lettering with like a brush. So how it works is when someone was doing the letter forms, on their downstroke, the brush would be pushed, letters would be wider, and then on the upstroke, it would be more along the tip of the brush, so it would be thinner. So if you look at letter forms and imagine how they were drawn, you will see that the widest areas are where you would be drawing down on that letter. This is helpful to remember when you are starting to play around with like script lettering, because that's where it's the most prominent, is in script form. And when you're doing illustrative lettering, you can get caught up in just sort of drawing. Like for example, even if you are doing thicks and thins, like when I'm doing script, I often will outline my letter shapes like this, as opposed to doing it like the traditional way, using pressure to get thick and thin areas. And as a result, you can sort of forget which areas should be thick and thin, and it can not look as good as it could. So as you can see, just by tracing these letters pretty loosely, we get this like handmade quality. Now I enhanced that by using a brush that had a little bit of a texture to it. This is a brush made by Retro Supply. Which one is it? It's the Classic Inker from one of their inking brush sets. I really like their brushes, and I have affiliate links to them in the description if you're interested. So another thing you can do now that you've traced the letters and given them that quality, you can sort of enhance it even more by selecting some of them and just sort of shifting them around a little bit. Maybe we'll do the T. Maybe we'll move this one down. Messing it up a little bit really starts to give it character. I'm getting caught up in the spacing here, so I need to fix this. And a lot of typefaces, even really good ones, sometimes you have to adjust the letter spacing because of how the letters are shaped. So because the A is really thin at the top and then gets wide at the bottom, there ends up looking like there's a lot of space between the previous letter. So you can visually adjust that by just sort of pushing it back a little bit. We can also move the R and the T back a little bit as well. That is one thing you can do. A way you can take this to the next level is by duplicating that layer. And then let's change the color of this. It doesn't matter what color you pick, but obviously I'm gonna overthink it. I'll fill this in like that. And now I'll click back on the original one. And then I'm just gonna shift this down. This is an easy way to get that like 3D style. So we'll go like that. And then when you're first starting out doing this, it can be helpful to turn down the opacity on the top layer so that you can see the other letters through. So we'll click back on our underneath layer. We will not use the paint bucket with our naked hand because we're not wearing a glove. And what we're gonna do here is we're just gonna connect each of the letters to themselves. For example, we'll connect that line, we'll connect this line, and we can just fill in that space. And then this one is not as easy because there's a curve, but you just find the furthest part of the curve out and then join it with the other one, that, and then pull this down. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is illustrative hand lettering, so it's supposed to be imperfect. So lean into the imperfections. If you don't do it exactly right, I mean, that's sort of the point. Okay, cool. So now that we connected all those points, we can just go in and fill in the areas that finish it off. And we can turn the opacity back up on our top layer. And now we've got some cool 3D lettering. You can make this even more of like a dramatic 3D thing and give it some, I don't know, like a crazy depth or something by doing the same thing, but when you duplicate it, you can also shrink it down smaller, move it further away like that, and then fill this in like that. Then bring down the transparency on the top one. So this can be a little trickier because it's further away, but the same process. So you would just find your points, connect them. One trick if you're using Fresco or Procreate and you want a straight line, you just hold. I feel like you may know that, lots of people know that already, but that will give you a straight line that you can adjust. It's helpful in these situations when you're drawing a line very far and maybe you don't do it exactly right, like here. When I eyeballed it, it's off. But again, you can lean into the imperfections, so if you don't get it right, maybe you just go with that. Okay, so now we will just close up our shapes so that we can use the paint bucket to fill it in. You can go in and just fix any overshots. Bring this opacity back up. So as you can see, got even more dramatic. Sometimes I'll go in and just cheat in a situation like this. For example, technically this angle is right because that's where it goes, but it looks a bit odd, so I'll just exaggerate it a little bit, pull it out further, maybe pull this T out so we don't get that weird little pocket. Maybe pull this back. Do the same for this S so it sort of makes that less of a cavernous opening. Pull that down a little bit. You could also really just sort of simplify these things at the bottom because it doesn't really matter and it'll still look right. One thing I'm not crazy about is that right there, so I'd probably just go like that and cheat it off. Cheat it away. Okay, so even though I consider this a way to just get started with lettering, it's actually something that I still do in nearly all of my lettering compositions, or whether I'm incorporating lettering into something, because it's a really great tool to sort of measure the space that you're working with so that you don't run out of space or need more space. What I'm talking about is making a sort of skeleton for your lettering and just like a guide. Let's say you have a specific space where you need your word or words to be. So let's say we have a shape for that space. And this is the space that we are working with. And we need to put the word pickle in this space. So what I would do is make a new layer, and then I would just simply write out the word in just like block uppercase letters like this, not worrying about anything to do with styling, and then making sure it fits. So we got lucky this time, it fit perfectly, but oftentimes it doesn't. In those cases, I'll just sort of stretch it to fit, because again, I'm not doing this for style, I'm just doing it as like a map for where each letter will go. Now I can turn down the opacity, turn down the opacity for a guide as well. And now we can use this as a, sort of a background guide to know how much space our letters can use so that we don't run out of space. So now I'll just trace over these and start to add in whatever style that I want to do. So let's say I wanted to make some pickly letters. I would just start drawing letters that sort of have a pickle vibe. I don't know, is this a pickle vibe? So even if the letters are overlapping, it's fine. I just know that I need to sort of center them around this guideline so that the letters are sort of uniform in size, unless you don't want to do that, and that's fine as well. But if you're trying to keep them somewhat uniform, this is a good way to do that. So if you're doing pickle type, let's turn off this. You probably, like, this is not that clear that it's a pickle, but I think if we put some lines like this, maybe some little like bumps, spice dots, I think it's really going to come down to color, if I'm being honest. I mean, it's sort of pickly. All right, let's move on. So you can take this a step further if you have like a non-traditional shape, or you want a non-traditional shape. Let's say you want to do some sort of fancy, I don't know, maybe like old-fashioned sort of thing. Let me turn up my smoothing on my brush so I can get a smooth line. You're trying to go for that like trippy, vintage poster look. So maybe you want this like swirly baseline, and then it goes up big so that the letters change in size. Let's say you wanted to put the word smelly in this shape. What we would do is, on a new layer, from our guide layer, we would just go in and do exactly what we did before, but we would write out the new word, smelly, and then just sort of follow these lines. And in this situation, it can be really helpful because as the letters change in size, the amount of space that they take up is going to change. So it can be hard it can be hard to adjust for that. Let's say it's really important that we make it to the end here. So let's stretch this out, bring it over there, bring this back because we started a little further in. And now we can use this to redraw it because, as you can see, the letter size changed and that's going to affect things. So we'll use this as a reference to make another simple version. Where we pay attention to the baselines, that top line. Now we have what we need, and we can bring down the transparency. So if we're trying to do that retro, vintage, trippy poster vibe, we want to sort of match the shape as well as we can. So we're going to pay attention to the tops and bottoms so that we're sort of filling this shape as well as we can and sort of making the letters fit together as well as we can. So this is something that, you know, takes some practice and it's not easy to do, but I'll show you how I would use this same system to do it. So I'm just going to follow along this line, and I'm making these spaces in between, like the openings of the letter, really small because I'm trying to get that style of like the vintage poster where it's all about like the shapes, filling it up, a little bit hard to read. Obviously doing like a simplified version of that, not getting too fancy. But I'm staying very close to the line so that it keeps that shape consistent. So the word is more about the overall shape that we're working with. I picked a bad word for this because we've got L's which have big gaps. So let me show you something that I like to do with L's when I need to do something like this. Actually, I do it a lot, is I stack my L's. So because we're going to stack them, it's going to take up a little bit more room. Or it's going to take up less room, so I'm going to exaggerate the length there. And I'm going to put the other L up here. Look at that. And now you gotta get the Y here, and we need to fill this space. So what I'll do here is maybe put a little tail on that part of the Y, and pull this in like that. And come back up here. And now we don't have any big gaps in between our letters. So go ahead, fill this in. Then we can get rid of our guides. And as you can see, the shape is very prominent. Okay, so let's say you have a really stupid picture of yourself and you need to add some type on top of it. You can use that same technique that we talked about with the shape to map this out. What I'm going to do now is just move my photo that I placed below my drawing layer. I'm going to bring down the opacity so I can still see it, but that I can draw on top of it easily. I'm going to make sure that I have a brush that's not ridiculous. And we can map out what we're going to put on here. So I think we can, to keep this simple, we're going to put LOL what on here. So let's say we want it on this side and we want to use this space. So I'm going to just sort of divide this space up. Because there's this curve here, I'm thinking I'll use sort of a curved shape to work this in. So maybe I'll just follow that line of my shoulder a little bit there, and then we can use the space up here for the first part of the word. So we'll just do exactly what we did before. We'll just write out our words. I guess LOL isn't a word, but you get the point. I'm gonna make a new layer in case we mess it up, then we don't have to redo the whole thing. And then our what, and I'm following my shoulder so that I can sort of incorporate the lettering into the composition in a sort of seamless way where it feels integrated. Okay, so we only had 3-letter words, so the spacing worked out just fine. So I'm gonna just merge those together and now turn down the opacity. And now I'm just gonna draw on top of this. So oftentimes when I'm doing this kind of thing, for the second round, I'll still go pretty loose, but I'll just add a little meat, a little beef to the letter weight, so I can sort of see what I'm doing. I have this like habit of naturally doing this sort of like wiggly punk rock, I don't know, basically the Misfits logo for like my default lettering. I think it's because I was obsessed with them for so long that I probably drew the Misfits or Danzig or Sam Hain logo probably 1,000 times, so it's just like muscle memory for me. Well, I'm talking about the Misfits. I did this little trick here that I probably should have mentioned. So when I'm doing lettering like this, where I want it to sort of fill a space and sort of interact with the image and make it about the shape as a whole, I do things to try to tuck letters together. And you want to make sure when you're doing something like this that you're not interfering too much with the legibility. Obviously, it makes it a little bit harder to read, but I think I like to sort of balance that spot where it's interesting to look at and has the aesthetic that I'm going for, but also you can still read it. But if it takes an extra 100th of a second, I'm okay with that. So this tucking the U underneath the T, sort of fine here, but if we were doing it the other way, we would have to be careful so that it didn't read like a J. One thing that I like to keep in mind is when you're drawing a letter, think about what are the characteristics that distinguishes it from other letters. And then make sure that you are not obscuring that specific thing. So for example, a K and an R are very similar, except the R closes up here. So if you were really sort of warping a K and like bending it, you would have to be careful that it didn't start to look like an R. What makes a K different is the fact that this is open at the top. So if it starts to be closed, that is going to interfere with that. Another place where this becomes important is an O and a D. So sometimes I'll play around with my O's, maybe they're sort of bendy like this. And I just want to make sure that they are always read as an O and not a D. I'll make sure that the opening in the middle is always centered and also follows the curve from the outside and inside and doesn't end up looking too straight. And I avoid having the inside be straight on an O unless the outside is also straight. Same for the D. A D could start to read like an O if you're very subtle with the outside edge. And some things that you could do is maybe move the center point over a little bit to the right like that to sort of emphasize the D part of it. But again, that still starts to look like an O. So you got to be careful. You could come in and just like make sure that that edge is straight, and just doing that really helps. Let's go back over here. So this LOL situation is tricky because the O and the L's, and I want to use this space. So I don't really know exactly how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to just sort of experiment a little bit here. Like that. Because this L is so bold now to use this space, I think that means we gotta make this one even bigger because it's a bigger letter. And then maybe we'll do some overlap action here. So maybe the O can be like that. And then let's say to make this space better, maybe we can add in a little exclamation point for style. Let's merge this down and then do a slightly tighter version. We can turn off that other layer. So hey, if you're finding this useful, while I'm outlining this here, can you just go ahead and give me a thumbs up? It really helps trick YouTube into showing this to more people. Because it's not really a trick, but you know, they need some proof that I'm making some content here that the people want to see. So do you think more people want to see this? Because I don't know if you've looked at my stats, but this is still a baby channel. My views are pretty low. And I'd like to keep making, well, I'm gonna keep making videos, but I'd like to be able to make more videos. I really enjoy doing them. I think they're fun, but they're very time consuming, and I'm not complaining about the time consuming aspect. It's just, I have to do the work that pays the bills. If this channel grows and it can start being monetized in some ways, then I can spend more time and make more videos. All right, so let's fill this jammer in. We'll just do white. I think that's fine, but let's go even further and use what we learned in the first or the second lesson and make this some 3D action. So I'm just gonna wing it instead of doing the trick that we learned last time. And I'm gonna turn up the opacity a little bit so that I can see my shirt. Grab my brush and just sort of trace over that shoulder line. Okay, now we can merge this together and then fill it in with the paint bucket. And then let's bring up the opacity on our photo. Looking pretty good. And I think instead of doing the 3D thing with the exclamation point, I was gonna try just having this be white. I think that is pretty cool, but it's a little too beefy now. So let's take a little bit out of it. I'll go like that. Go like that, and then click back on this layer and erase. Cool. So those are some easy ways to get started with lettering. I hope you enjoyed this.